Hi, I'm back with more of the little guy, and we stopped yesterday with his diary entry of 24th January 1906, and now we're skipping several days, and sorry, something out here is irritating me, and we are resuming with the 28th of January. So I am not skipping diary entries, but for whatever reason, Dimitri wasn't writing on the 25th, 26th, and 27th. So these are actually the last two diary entries for January 1906. So we'll have made it through a month. And again, he goes from the 28th to the 31st. And this was kind of a fraught time for him, and probably also for Maria and for Grand Duchess Ella, because of coming up on the anniversary of Sergei Alexandrovich's very bloody and violent death. He was blown up by a terrorist bomb, literally blown to pieces. There was a rumor actually in Moscow that his heart was found on a rooftop nearby, and that may, I rather doubt it. That may have been an allusion to the fact that he was considered to be a rather heartless person. But I don't know. Okay, so here we are on the 28th, and we have the introduction of three people, but I don't think I really need to introduce them, because if you're watching this, I'm sure you know who they are, and in fact probably know more about them than I do. So the first one, I assume, is Grand Duchess Olga Alexandrovna, the Tsar's youngest sibling and second sister, and Dmitri doesn't identify her beyond the name Olga. So it is assumption on my part, but it seems like the most likely one. And she was quite a young woman at that time. She was, I think, 23 years old. And let's see, I like to include the ages to sort of give you some perspective, because we tend to think of these people as being, at least I do, as being at a certain age from the time when we know the most about their life and their activities. So she was 23. The other person that Dimitri mentions, actually there are four people. I skipped grandfather. So grandfather was King George I of Greece, and he'd been the king of Greece, or rather the king of the Hellenes, I think was how they put it, since he was a teenager himself, and he was actually Danish. He was born into the Danish royal family, and he was the father of Dimitri's mother, who died in childbirth. So the next person is Grand Duchess Ksenia, who was Nicholas's eldest of his two sisters. She wasn't older than Nicholas, and she was 30 years old at that time, and she was married to Uncle Sandro, who is Grand Duke Alexander Mikhailovich, who was just about to turn 40 years old, and he was he's well known for being the Grand Duke who wrote in exile. He managed to survive the revolution, and in exile he wrote 2 volumes of memoirs, Once a Grand Duke and Always a Grand Duke. And he was what was I going to say about Sandro? I can't remember. His nickname, by the way, was not an Italian form of his name. It was a Georgian form of his name, because he and his brothers grew up in the Caucasus, where their father, Grand Duke Mikhail Nikolaevich, was the viceroy of the Caucasus. So Dimitri's relationship with these people in later years, I don't think he had much of a relationship with Olga. I think Olga more or less disapproved of him. His grandfather would be assassinated, so both of his grandfathers would actually be assassinated. So George he never met his father's father, Emperor Nicholas Alexander II, who was assassinated by a terrorist bomb in 1881, and his Greek/Danish grandfather George I would be assassinated in 1913, I think, just by sort of a disgruntled lone person who shot him. Ksenia and Dmitri always had a certain amount of fondness for each other, and if we ever make it to his post-revolutionary diaries, you'll see some really nice moments between the two of them. But all of that fell apart when Dmitri sort of inexplicably decided, after years of resisting, to back his cousin, Grand Duke Kirill Vladimirovich, when Kirill decided to proclaim himself the emperor in exile. So that was not something that Ksenia supported at all, and when Dmitri supported that, that was more or less the end of their relationship, as you'll see. Sandro and Dmitri, I don't think there was really any love lost between them. They did meet in exile, and that was fine as so far as it went, but they weren't, you couldn't say they were friends or that they had a great deal of respect for each other. So we'll get into that later. So here's the diary entry of the 28th. I just returned from Olga's. It wasn't much fun, though it was better than it was 2 weeks ago. There I received a very good gift from my grandfather, a watch. Very good, I really like it. Ksenia returned with Uncle Sandro. She's really nice, I like her very much. Prokofiev came today, but this time he didn't bring new tools. On the contrary, he took some back. Okay, so if you recall, Dmitri was actually complaining and made some nasty remark to his woodworking teacher, Mr. Prokofiev, and complained that Prokofiev was bringing too many tools and that Dmitri didn't even know what to do with them. So I guess it's not surprising that Prokofiev, after having been scolded by a 14-year-old boy, decided that he would take some of these tools back. And Dmitri doesn't seem to be bothered by that. So did he actually know Ksenia and Sandro and Olga? Well, of course, he knew them superficially, but recall that he'd been raised in Moscow in recent years, since 1902, since he'd been pretty young, about 10 or 11 years old. And so he was getting reacquainted with them, and he was getting to know them in a less superficial level. And okay, let's see. His grandfather, he's very happy with this watch. Although not quite as thrilled as he was with these mittens made from the cheap wool by his bodyguard or by the sentry. That was really rather touching, how excited he was by those. But he likes the watch. So on we go to, skipping the 29th and the 30th, on we go to the 31st of January. We were just now reading The Sign of Four, a Sherlock Holmes story. It's interesting as hell. One simply can't put it down. Tomorrow we're going to Moscow at 10:30. I hope it will only be for 3 days and no more. I don't know what's wrong with me. It's been so many days since I've written. I took a walk with Borya this evening. It seems there was a little upset with Mademoiselle, who was offended by something, and apparently I'm involved in the matter. Oh, that's not good. I'm even glad we're going to Moscow for a few days. It seems it was very shameful, but we'll be very welcome there. All right, so some interesting things there. So Dmitri was at that moment into Sherlock Holmes, and there will be more to come on that. He was already at that time fluent in English, although when I say fluent, not quite. He did get things mixed up sometimes, but he was able to read a Sherlock Holmes book. No big deal. I read a Sherlock Holmes book with one of my language students. And personally, I'm not a big fan, but that's neither here nor there. Arthur Conan Doyle had been a resident in Davos, which, as you know, is my other great passion beyond Dmitri. Davos and Schatzalp, and Arthur Conan Doyle was a resident there at one of the big 5-star hotels called the Hotel Belvedere, which was very English. But I'm digressing. So, Sherlock Holmes. So tomorrow they're leaving for Moscow, and Dmitri is very pleased because he's found out that it will only be for 3 days. Or at least he seems fairly confident about that now, whereas in the previous diary entry that mentioned it, he was not. So he still hasn't written to Aunt Ella, which is bound to be a little awkward because, when you've sort of blown somebody off and then you have to confront them face to face, that is definitely an uncomfortable situation, but you know that. I don't know why I'm talking about that. Okay, out with Borya, his little friend again. And what happened on this walk? Oye, it's very typical of Dmitri that these things were happening, and you'll see this repeatedly in these adolescent diaries, that he's always putting his foot in his mouth and offending people and saying, "Oh, I didn't mean to. I didn't have any idea that I was offending them." And he really, to me, seems in most instances to be protesting too much. And I think he absolutely knew what he was doing. But who is Mademoiselle to begin with? I've been racking my brains trying to figure that out. Who could that have been? The only Mademoiselle I can think of would have been Maria's governess, Miss June, so-called. But since he doesn't say Miss June, I'm not at all sure who Mademoiselle would have been. It couldn't have been Borya's mother, Mrs. Laming, because I don't think Dimitri's French was that primitive that he would mix up a Mademoiselle for a Madame. But anyway, whoever it was, my theory is that he said something that was not insulting, but something that had some kind of sexual insinuation. And I say that only because it seems to have happened. And in one instance from these diaries when he was 14, it definitely happened. And he talks about it in terms that leave no doubt about that. And there's another instance in 1908 when he's out with his 12-year-old cousin, and I think he's 16 at that time. Yeah, he's 16 at that time, and his cousin Olga is 12, and he says something to her that makes Nicholas and Alexandra decide that he shouldn't be alone with her on outings anymore. And then there's another instance when he's 16 years old, when he makes a pass at a woman old enough to be his mother, Missy, the Queen of Romania, Queen Marie of Romania, and that blows up into a big family scandal. And Dmitri then says that, well, she led him on and that she was giving him, he thought, signals that she wanted to hook up with him, to put it in modern vernacular, and she was saying that no, absolutely not. And ultimately Dmitri did acknowledge that she hadn't been making advances toward him, and Maria herself says that Marie says that he was mortified when he made that realization, and so she gave him the benefit of the doubt that he honestly had thought that he'd gotten the go-ahead from her to sort of pounce. And she blames part of it on his muddled English. I can't remember her exact words, but anyway, that's getting too far ahead. But watch this space, as they say, with diary entries that are coming up in the next 2 months of his diaries about his interest in girls and in women and the things he's saying that are getting him in trouble. So when we resume, and the reason why I'm stopping after 2 relatively short diary entries today is that the diary entries when we resume on the 1st of February. Those diary entries for the first part of February, and actually throughout the month, as I'm scrolling through my text here, are quite long diaries. So this was, as you already know, a tumultuous time for Dmitri, Maria, and Grand Duchess Elizabeth. And they had some things that they needed to work out. And so, yeah, I'll be back with that soon. Thank you, as always, for watching. Bye.